Inside the Trump indictment, highlights he knew he'd lost. He knew his lawyers were crazy. He knew that Pence was in danger. Chris Graham here for Augusta Free Press. So we'll start this with a little story. A Trump aide on January 6, 2021, as the U.S. Capitol was being overrun by MAGA rioters trying to stop the certification of the 2020 presidential election, informed Donald Trump, who was sitting alone in the White House dining room, that Vice President Mike Pence was being evacuated after the rioters had gotten within 40 feet of his U.S. Senate office. Trump's response, so what? That's that says a lot, doesn't it, about how Donald Trump handled January 6th. We learned this from the bombshell 165-page legal brief that was unsealed by a federal judge on Wednesday. It detailed special counsel Jack Smith's case against the former president, who faces an array of federal charges in a criminal conspiracy to overturn the 2020 election that Trump directed for the purpose of being able to stay in power. Now, so among the things we learned, let's go through some of the highlights here. The idea all along, it seems, was to declare victory no matter what. Trump did this in 2016, you might remember, when the polls had Hillary Clinton on the verge of eking out a narrow win, and Trump prepped the battlefield with claims that the election had already been rigged against him. The plan going into Election Day 2020, then, after, he did the same thing with the elections rigged, they learned one lesson, though, from 2016, from how the results were, slowly made public on election nights. There were going to be even more delays on 2020 because of the massive increase in the amount of early voting, mail voting. And so the big part of the Trump plan going into election night 2020 was to, quote, just declare victory, unquote, according to the indictment. One aide said, and this is a quote, "It doesn't mean he's the winner. He's just going to say he's the winner. That's our strategy." Now, we saw that play out, right? We saw actually, relatively early in the night, Trump declared victory, even before you would normally have done so back, say, 20 years ago, when voting was done largely on election day and you had results relatively early in the night. Relatively early in the night on election night 2020, Trump was already trumpeting that he had won the election. So that's getting a little bit of ahead of ourselves, but that was the plan all along, that they were going to do that. Now, after the election, we learned from the unsealed indictment, he was well aware after the election that he had lost. Trump was. Details don't matter, Trump told one aide. This is according to the indictment, when it came to the results of the 2020 election, which he lost by more than 7 million votes. And the Electoral College went 302 to 236 in favor of Joe Biden. It doesn't matter if you won or lost the election, Trump was overheard telling members of his family, you still fight like hell. It does matter whether you won or lost. If you watch sports, for example, I'm a fan of the Baltimore Orioles. Orioles lost 2-1 in game two yesterday. Their season's over. Game's over. You don't fight like hell to, see if you can get the Major League Baseball to overturn the result. Game's over. And the fight like hell reference echoes what Trump said in his speech to thousands of his supporters on the National Mall on January 6th, minutes before thousands of those supporters walked down Pennsylvania Avenue to the U.S. Capitol and overran the Capitol, trying to stop the electoral votes from being counted. He told them to fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you won't have a country anymore, he said that day. So language consistent throughout the period there. So not only was Trump well aware that he had lost, his top aides were aware too. We have one text from the White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, saying fraud claims about 10,000 dead people had voted. He said they were false. He knew they were false. The actual number was 12, not 12,000, 12. 12. That's not going to change the election. But he texted us as the Trump campaign was pursuing claims that 10,000 had voted in that election in Michigan alone. Then a person believed to be senior Trump advisor Jason Miller, the name was redacted when it was unsealed. The indictment was unsealed, but this person believed to be Jason Miller said, quote, "It's tough to own any of this when it's all just conspiracy s beamed down from the mothership." So Jason Miller is saying there he knows that this is conspiracy BS. And Miller did refer to the lawyers representing Trump post-election as the Star Wars bar. And if you've watched any of the Star Wars movies, you know what he's talking about there. That collection of just oddities at the cantina scene in the movie Star Wars. Um, Actually, having seen some of these lawyers, it's a pretty good reference, actually. So we know that the Star Wars bar lawyers were also crazy and unhinged, and those are words from Trump. One scene laid out in the indictment involved a conference call with Trump's staff and legal advisors, in which Trump made it clear he didn't believe the wild claims of one of his lawyers, Sidney Powell. She's one of the most interesting people from the Star Wars bar. Trump himself derided her as, quote, crazy and, quote, unhinged. Powell later pleaded guilty to 6 misdemeanor counts related to the effort to overturn the election. She did that last year. The move to hire Rudy Giuliani, who himself is a special person in this Star Wars bar. The former New York City mayor, back when he was America's mayor? Man, it's so long ago. 2008 Republican Party presidential candidate. He didn't, fare very well in the primaries, but he had a brief moment in the spotlight there that year. So the move to hire him was made because Giuliani was, quote, willing to falsely claim victory and spread knowingly false claims of election fraud. That's according to Trump insiders, according to the indictment. Now, the caveat was that Trump told staffers he would only pay Giuliani if the legal cases succeeded. And here's a follow up to that note. In a 2024 court filing in Giuliani's bankruptcy case, the one about $148 million defamation judgment against him for falsely claiming that two women in Georgia had tried to insert stuffed ballot boxes basically into the count. In that court filing, he said he was owed $2 million for his legal work for Trump. Trump stiffed him. It's not, it's not surprising, but he stiffed him. One other funny tidbit from the indictment about Giuliani. You might have heard about his issues with butt dialing people. He sent a proposed resolution for Michigan Republican lawmakers to declare the election there to be in dispute to the wrong phone number. He texted this document. He texted it to the wrong phone number. If you're wondering how the feds know. I mean, oh my goodness, you can't make this up. So there was the next thing is a Christmas Day conspiracy. Several of Trump's top aides and advisors text chained a new scheme on Christmas Day 2020. And this is where the idea to try to pressure Mike Pence into being a part of this was hatched. Basically, the idea was to, quote, permit an unlimited filibuster of the certification and then have Pence, quote, ultimately gavel in Trump as president. So the idea was, all right, so there's this thing on January 6th, Constitution says, votes, whatever, you got to be counted that day. For however long, 230 some years, 240 some years. It's a ceremonial thing. The vice president, who is the president of the Senate, stands up there with a gavel. The senators vote. Electoral college is counted, and then bang a gavel, it's certified because the election is already long over by then. Uh, Plan was to filibuster, let the senators filibuster, unlimited filibuster, presumably from January 6th until January 20th at noon, and then say we never decided who was president, and then bang gavel, Trump's still president. That was the plan. Uh, this was after they had gone 0 for 62 in their legal challenges in state and federal courts. It was to have Mike Pence play the key role. Now, when it was clear that Pence was not going to go along with this, and it's just funny to think that, if Trump had been better at vetting his vice president back in 2016 and found a guy who was as slimy as he is, we would be in a different place right now. But Trump got frustrated with his VP. At one point, told him that hundreds of thousands of people are going to hate your guts. So what was Trump doing on January 6th? He was reveling in the fact that hundreds of thousands of people hated Mike Pence's guts. Coinciding with the so what comment about the danger being faced by Pence, Trump tweeted at 2:24 p.m. on the afternoon of January 6th that Pence had lacked, quote, the courage because he hadn't bowed to pressure from Trump to use his ceremonial role overseeing the Senate to halt the certification of the election. Now, we knew about that tweet. That tweet has long since been public knowledge. What we learned from the unsealed document is that the feds know that Trump was the one who pecked it out with his little fingers on his phone all by his lonesome. It wasn't somebody else who did it at his direction. It wasn't somebody else who did it on their own initiative. It was Trump himself. I want to talk about that in a second. So the defendant personally posted a tweet at a point where he already understood the Capitol had been breached. This is 224. We're already about an hour into the Capitol having been overrun by Trump MAGA protesters. Now, we also learned from this that Trump was alone with his phone in the White House. He was watching Fox News coverage in the White House dining room, and that he had spent most of his afternoon that day on Twitter. What's particularly interesting there is that we now know that prosecutors have had access to Trump's phone, and you just have to wonder what else they found when they got access to that phone that we have not learned about yet. I'm going to leave you there because let your mind wander on that one, like mine's been since I've read that last night. Hey, if you have any questions for me, any comments, story tips, news tips, story ideas, you just want to say hi, feel free to email me at chris@augustafreepress.com.